Today is September 10th, 2014, and I'm sitting with Sarah and Maury Lefsky in the Sheepshead Bay area of Brooklyn, New York. I'm conducting this interview as part of Brooklyn Public Library Streets, Our Stories, Our Project. Thank you both for taking the time to meet with me today.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
So let's start with you, Sarah, first. Tell me, where did you grow up?
Well, I have a European background. I was born in Graz, Austria, and my parents were Holocaust survivors, so it was after World War II, and we ended up in Italy. So I do know languages. I came to America with Italian and Yiddish, and I did become a language professional teacher who taught French, Spanish, and English as a second language. So my basic background is European as an immigrant child, but I consider myself very American.
Okay, and Maury, what about you? Tell me where you grew up.
I grew up in East New York and Brooklyn for about the first 14 years of my life, from about 1945 to 1959. And then we moved to East Flatbush near Brooklyn College. And from there, I just went out on my own. I started teaching and all that. I moved to an apartment by myself in Beach Haven, which is the Gravesend area. And from there, I met Sarah, and then we got married and moved to Sheepshead Bay about 38 years ago.
Okay, now Sarah, you mentioned that you have a European background. Can you tell me about your parents and what were their occupations?
Well, time of the war, my parents were involved as young people because they were quite young and the war had broken out. My mother came from a family that was a little more with money than my dad did. Her father owned a store, and it was a small town in Poland. He had a dry goods store. What we consider dry goods in those years would be paper products, ribbon, wrapping paper, things of that sort. But the war did break out. She already was married, my mom, at the time. She did have a husband and a young baby, and everyone was killed. Her dad, her mother had died in infancy when she was born, so there was a cousin that was raising my mom. But as life would have it, it was very difficult for her to lose everyone. She was the only one remaining from a line where everyone would be rounded up, brought to the town square, and this was the time of the Nazis. Holocaust times were very difficult, for Jewish people especially. My dad came from another town in Poland, which later the lines changed and it became Russian lines. But it was more of a family with more children, and they did have some agricultural background. He had a brother and a sister that had left before the war, and they had gone to Palestine, which later became Israel. My dad met my mom in the woods after my mother had lost totally her family, and were married, and I was born in the woods. And it was Austria at that time. He led a group, my dad, very, very strong personality, saved a group of people. He led that group over the Alps, many different countries. Czechoslovakia was an important country to cross. A lot of this was done nighttime, all through forest areas. And my mother, who was very intelligent, she had great training in school. So she was able to go into the woods, into farm areas. They needed, to eat, so it was difficult. But if she could find a potato or something that somebody would give her, and she would bring it back because the people were hungry. And there was a lot going on, and I, as a child, also difficult for her. I know it was very difficult. As a baby makes noise, so there were things that they had to keep the baby quiet. And I was really baby at the time in the group. And they were able to cross the Alps. And eventually, even though the war supposedly was over in 1945, they were able to get into Italy, cross into Italy. And Italy at that time was more or less a safe haven. It was after 1945. But for them, they really couldn't do much because they had to be in, there were refugee camps, but this particular one was in Italy where they had managed to get to. And it was Mussolini's villa, which became a refugee camp. And thousands of Jewish people were there. Other people as well, other nationalities, but I think the greater part of the people, of the groups, were Jewish people because they had lost everything. Homes were taken, whether it was business or whatever else that they had, a lot was taken. And these people had nothing. They had the clothes on their backs, basically, and they were lucky enough if they had teeth. My parents had a problem. Teeth were knocked out, and lots of Holocaust stories out there. But they really were survivors. And we ended up in Mussolini's villa for about 2.5 years, and we did not come to the States until 1950. And in order to come, you could not come to Israel. It was still, the civil war there. But there was a cousin that had left Europe very early, and he had made his fortune from a cheese factory. He had the factory in Newark, but they lived in Brooklyn. And there had to be a person or family member somehow to vouch for people in order to come into America. You could not even come to America. So it did take a while. Papers that they had were not their own papers. It would be falsified, actually, from people that were dead. And there were groups that underground groups that were able to supply various names and dates so that people could enter the United States. And things were not the same for them. Their names were different, ages were different in order to come in. Very, very hard for them. They came through, I don't remember, but I don't remember it was called the Saturnia. That's what it was. It was an Italian ship. And they were in what is called steerage on the bottom of the ship. And I do remember my mom saying that it was a hard voyage. She never went on a ship after that. She was not healthy in order to make that trip. But they made it through. And I was in Brooklyn for, I think, approximately 6 months. I was a young 4.5, 5 maybe. So I did start kindergarten just for a short time, PS 100, which was now Ocean Parkway area and West 5th Street. But they did not stay long. There were groups that helped the Holocaust survivors, and we lived in Jersey, South Jersey, which was a Holocaust town, and it had Italian people living there prior to the Jewish Holocaust survivors coming in. So my father was a farmer. He had a wonderful sense of humor, because I used to say growing up, why would you want to be a farmer? Such a hard life with live animals all day, all night. He said, well, because the chickens don't need a language. So he was a smart man with a lot of humor. And my mother helped on the farm. They never really, worked in that field, but you learn. You do learn. My brother was an American born and has since passed away. He was in Vietnam, and I would say coming out of Vietnam 20 years later, what Agent Orange people suffer, the 9/11 people, this is what happened to my brother Bernie. He had esophageal cancer, so he did pass away before age 47. And it was very tough for us. Hard for my mom, who was living another 8 years, actually, after my brother died. And my dad, by the way, was not living long, because Holocaust survivors in many situations were broken people, whether it was psychologically or physically. As strong as he was, he had needed to take a second job, and he worked in a cotton mill nearby in our town. Our town was Vineland, New Jersey, and he worked in Millville, New Jersey. For the Army, they made cotton products, and he succumbed to stomach cancer. So they lived 17 years in New Jersey.
White lung.
Yeah, it's called white lung. Right. So he did pass away before age 50. And it was, just a sad thing, because they needed to make a little extra money. The farming industry was never good. Poultry, eggs were always, I think I remember growing up, a dozen of eggs would be 29 cents, 39 cents. Very difficult job. 24 hours, no vacation, no Sundays, getting up. The chickens had to be fed very early in the a.m. and then round the clock, 3 a.m. you had to be up again, and then by 6 a.m. collecting the eggs. It's a really tough kind of living. But when you're coming into a country and you don't have the trade and you don't have the language, they did learn. Yes, they learned English, and yes, they became Americanized, but it really was hard for them. They had a very, very tough, the background was tough, but living was tough too. So I grew up with many good qualities, I think, because I knew what it was like growing up in a household that appreciated everything. And that's how I feel I am today. I do appreciate a lot of things that some people take for granted.
Okay, Maury, can you tell me about your parents?
Yes,
and
they
what were
grew
their
up in Russia.
occupations?
They grew up in Russia, and in the 1920s they were little children. And what happened was there were pogroms where the soldiers of the Cossacks would come in and beat up some Jews and kill a few Jews, because they were told that's the in thing to do, whatever. So their families decided to come here when they were little children. They came here to America, and they met here when they got a little older, and they got married and all that. My father pressed clothes all his life. Those were the heavy irons, the heavy machine. It's not the little tiny iron we use. And it was very difficult. He did it 6 or 7 days a week to make ends meet. My mother stayed home as a housewife. And there were many times when basically we had very little food. We would eat a piece of chicken, my sister and I, and they would have potatoes and all that. But they did for us tremendously, and we grew up very nicely, very poor. But in those days, I don't think we needed much, actually. All we needed was to have a stickball bat and a ball and play in the street, and we were fine. Very minimal in the way of, obviously, no computers. We didn't have a TV till we were older. We had a radio. That was about the only entertainment we had. And we grew up that way. It was poor, but everyone else in the neighborhood was poor too in East New York. So we had no concept we were poor. We were happy. We had a very good life growing up. But basically, no one ever talked about poverty because everyone was poor. Everyone was in the same boat in the entire area. Whoever lived in that area, it didn't matter. Everyone grew up very poor, but we were happy. We grew up very nice and happy. We made a lot of friends that way. So we were very fortunate to have grown up that way.
Can you describe what East New York looked like back then?
Yes, it was an older community then also. The buildings are somewhat older, not in very good condition because the landlords could probably not even afford to fix them, because basically the rent may have been my mother's father paid for, I think, one bedroom. We shared one bedroom, my sister and I and my parents. There was a living room, then a couch opened up. There was a bed in the hallway. We just managed because that's all we could afford. The rent may have been either $28 or $32 a month, and they lived in that. And it was very nice. It was all community because everyone got together. Black people, white people, Irish, Jewish, Italian. It didn't matter. It was a fantastic community. Everyone helped each other. And when people say the doors were open all day, it's true. At night, you closed your door. During the day, you knocked at someone's door and walked right in. It was a very good community, I think. I don't see that now in Sheepshead Bay. I don't see it in a lot of other communities because you tend to just go to work, go home, whether it's your TV or your computer, whatever you have your kids do, there's not much activities. You have to practically force kids for sports and all that. We automatically played stickball on the street. We went to a park to play baseball or something, and there was never, a time we didn't have anything to do. We were up in the morning if we weren't going to school, and we stayed till it was sundown to go inside and, go home. And basically, if our parents didn't see us, a neighbor would say, you have to go in now, it's getting dark. That's the type of community it was. Everyone cared for everyone else. And it was very nice growing up because everyone was your family to some degree. Besides your immediate family, obviously, and it was a great way growing up.
Safer and
much safer also because everyone looked out for everyone else. If there was someone in the neighborhood that they felt was going to hit someone or whatever the situation is, they would look out for you and everyone else.
And not much crime.
Minimal crime, but minimal drugs too.
What
minimal
about
nothing.
what about a key to a house? No.
Yeah,
To
just
an
at night.
apartment?
No, that's at night. We close the door, as
Which
I
is
said.
interesting.
Yeah, because there was no need to close the door. Because the mentality is now, if you walk into your house, you close the 12 locks in your door. You put the alarm on your car. You make sure your gas tank lock is closed, etc. And it's a sad way to live as far as I'm concerned. I didn't know this when I grew up. We never had a key till we were older. Because we were too young. We didn't need a key, basically. The door was always open. And there was never a problem. It was sort of like everyone looked out for everyone else.
There weren't latchkey kids, really.
No.
No.
Most mothers were home, were
That's
housewives,
true.
basically. And my father had to work to get extra jobs and all that, pressing clothes, because basically my mother stayed home. Every other woman stayed home too, because someone had to be home for the children. That was the mentality. And now you may see, if you're lucky, you see grandparents take care of the kids while the mother and father work. And unfortunately nowadays, I can relate to that. Two people have to work to make ends meet.
Yeah.
I have two jobs, teaching and after-school job, plus my regular job. Sarah worked during the day. She worked at night also in ESL. So it was a necessity. Just to make ends meet, we bought a two-family house to have tenants to help us support, keep the house up. So basically it's a different lifestyle.
Yeah.
I liked it better when I was a kid. Maybe I'm old. Old people say that, unfortunately. Oh, it was great in the good old days. But the good old days were good old days for me, basically. Sarah went through a lot rougher time than I did. My parents are lucky. They left when pogroms occurred, which is more beatings up and a few killings, very basic, where the Holocaust is a big difference with the Nazis killing everybody. Every Jew, every Gypsy, or whatever they were killing. So
Many
the thing
different
is, we were
ethnic
fortunate.
backgrounds.
My parents are fortunate by being here, and they're very happy being here, and they were extremely respectful of authority. If a policeman said, stand on your head for 2 weeks, they would probably do it. They were always respectful. The teacher said, I had a terrible situation. I used to talk in school. I was an evil child. I talked constantly, and my sister was good. She was much better. She listened, talked very little in class, and they would come home, and they would raise me, not by physically touching me, but by giving me guilt trips. In other words, they said, how could you talk? The teacher's so nice. She's trying so hard. So you felt guilty where you stopped talking for about 2-3 months at work. Then it kind of wore off. And basically, it's a great way to raise kids, I believe. Guilt is a lot better than physically touching a child with screaming and yelling. And my father was very gentle. My mother probably was more disciplined. The disciplinarian, my father, she would always say, wait till Daddy comes home. And the truth is, when he came home, he did nothing. If we were wrong, he'd just say, you shouldn't do that, it's not right. He was very quiet, gentle, serious with it. And I never knew her father, unfortunately. He died before I knew her. But she got to know my parents. So it worked out nicer.
Did you ever meet her mom?
Yes,
yes,
her mom
yes.
was alive. Yeah, very lovely lady, very nice, really.
My mother lived to almost age 90, which is interesting because...
For a Holocaust, that's good.
For a Holocaust survivor, it's fabulous, of course. And she had many things in her life. She lost a child and a first husband, of course, and the whole family. So you would think that alone would...
And there's a guilt trip also.
Right, and she was the only one to survive at that time from that
They
situation.
formed the line, and on the line they actually
Right.
made her go to one side for some reason, and the rest of the family went
And
to
so
the
she
opposite
never
side.
really knew why she was saved. And it's a very difficult way to live your life because somehow she had managed to get away from that line in the square, and I would think she lived with that her whole life. It kind of raised a lot of questions. There was a reason for her to make it through, and of course she did marry my dad in the forest. But she had interesting qualities. Very quiet lady, but extremely intelligent. Languages, her math was excellent. Her English, just right on Johnny on the spot. If she wasn't correct, she wanted
Except for the word
her
shirt.
children,
Remember the word shirt?
whether it was
The
my
funniest thing
brother
is
or myself to correct her.
yeah.
She wanted to know the spelling of the word, and when you're writing it, she had an accent, and which you don't lose, because if you hear after age 10, you have that accent. But interesting qualities about her. As quiet as she was, she probably deep down suffered tremendously with a lot of the horrific experiences that she had. And then, of course, the loss of my brother at a later point in time, that really, really did a terrible, it really created a terrible hole in her heart. I think that was very difficult. And he was 46 at the time when he started his serious cancer, and my mother was a lot older. So that does take a toll when you lose a child, whatever age, the second child especially. I do believe, though, she was a survivor, because she waited until my youngest daughter got married. And she had already had a stroke, she had Parkinson's, she had had brain surgery, and 6 weeks later, she passed away after the wedding. So it shows that, God was looking over. She wanted to make that wedding.
She said she did. She
Yeah,
always said that.
and she had an aide. My mom needed an aide full-time because people with Parkinson's cannot be left alone. So I needed somebody to sleep in her house. But I think God was very, very good. She died in her house the way she wanted, and she was very strong about the way she wanted to pass. I had asked about a hospital, a doctor. I said, Mom, maybe, something. And she already felt it in her heart. She knew that she had lived to the moment of my second daughter's marriage, and it was the finality for her. She made it through to that point. But she persevered. This interesting personality. Sometimes, you just push. And there were many times after my brother died, she says, I really want to die, I really want to die. But I said, Mom, you don't get that choice. God makes that choice. And she made it through to the point of the wedding, and then I think she was finally able to, to come to that point. And, the body gives out. I do believe the body finally gives out. But she achieved a lot in her life, and she worked for Lord and Taylor when my dad died, and she had to leave the farm, and she couldn't do all the things that you have to do in New Jersey. Came to New York, got an apartment, got a job, worked at Lord and Taylor. She had very famous people. Lord and Taylor in those years had a lot of famous actors and actresses in Manhattan, that were living there, and the clientele, very European, so she knew languages, and they loved her. And she looked the part. A European lady that looked the part that should work in Lord and Taylor. But she was so thrilled and proud, so proud. Oh, I have a job at Lord and Taylor. I said, that's great. You can do things. You really can.
It seems as though your mom especially, she reinvented herself,
Well, you have
times.
to.
That's a
You
good
have
word.
to. When you lose,
Yes.
it's a very good word. When you lose a husband and you're not really trained for anything, because don't forget, they were already with one child, and then another child was on the way when they came to it. My brother was born in 1950 when they had come to America. So it's difficult when you don't have a way, but you have to find a way. And then 17 years later, you're on a farm and you don't have a husband. You cannot do farm work on your own. So you have to just liquidate everything. She went into bankruptcy, of course, because you're not owning anything. You can't. Never drove. Very difficult to live on a farm. My father was a driver, he had to drive, but my mom, no, she depended on him. So it shows you a woman with a lot of intelligence and a difficult background, and now you're in a place and lost really your whole soul practically. Your husband passes away, you have 2 young children, and I was already a very young college student. My brother was 4 years younger, so he was in a precarious situation. When you lose a father and you're just 13, very difficult for a boy. I think I was a little bit more on my way, and I kind of was an older person in growing up, older in my head. I was always that child that was like the adult, because maybe I did that to myself. I had to do it. I really had to do it. I didn't have a dad, and my mother could not in any way really help out. She needed to do what she had to do for herself, and I think I realized that early on, that I have to be my own person and have to be strong in character and do it on my own, because there's no one to come to for money or to ask for anything. You have to work. Whether it's waitressing, which I did proofreading, I worked at college, I had scholarships, yes, but I still had 3 jobs at college, absolutely, and I worked every summer. I waitressed even when I became a teacher in New York. I was a French teacher in Jersey first, and then I came to New York where I met Murray, and I worked as a waitress, and somebody once said, well, why would you be a waitress, on the weekends? This was near Columbus Circle in Manhattan, a very lovely restaurant. I said, why? Because I like people, and you could be a teacher and still waitress to make extra money. I mean, it's not a sin. But I did a lot of things. I did do a lot of things. And it wasn't beneath me. It really wasn't. I look at people today, and when you're out of work, you have to try. You may not get the job that you're trained for, but you can do something. I really believe in it. I know that I did, without language and without people helping. But I was a different character. I think I try to push myself. I'm a little girl, but I try to push myself in where I could.
Well, you mentioned how your parents did so many different things because they had to change their whole occupation and become farmers.
Well, that's right. They didn't have an occupation when they came to America. Mm-hmm. They were, you're coming from a war and you have nothing. You're coming from a home taken away from you. You're coming from family gone. You're coming from whether you were they were educated, of course, but education is not doing you any good in a war. It doesn't matter if you're a banker, a lawyer, a store owner. You don't have that occupation anymore. So you're coming to a new country, which immigrants do all along now. And I understand that, because as an immigrant child, I was exactly in the field that I had to be in. It just shows that God was really looking over, because ESL, English as a Second Language, which is mandated in New York State, it shows you that an immigrant and being a teacher can do it. And this is how people do it too, whether they're young or old. You have to reinvent the word that you use. You do reinvent yourself. Yes.
I just have a quick question. Did any of your parents talk about how life was for them to adjust? I know they had to adjust.
Oh, yeah.
But did they ever discuss it with you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I grew up in a very good home, because Holocaust survivors, I would say more than 50%, more than that, are kind of broken people psychologically, mentally, psychologically, physically, of course, but mentally, because you've been worn down so much. So a lot of the Holocaust survivors have psychological situations. But now you are born, you are a child in that home. So of course it transfers to the children. It has to. There's no way. But in my parents' home, and it was not so for my brother so much because he was American born. I was already beyond that. I was about 5 or so. And I grew up seeing what they went through. So I became very active in the Holocaust. I was a second-generation active person. I was sent to Washington. I was in a pilot project for teachers, 10 teachers from the U.S., to do a study on the Holocaust. 1985, that Holocaust had begun to be taught in New York State. I was one of those 10 to be chosen to go do study and to bring back the information to the United States, and especially New York, because it does have a lot of survivors. And I think I grew up the best way possible because they talked about everything. They did not they didn't shun it, so to speak. They exposed me to it, and that's why I kind of was a sponge. I was brought into it, but in a good way. You know, I knew the negativity that they had to endure. There was a lot that they had to endure. But I think I ran with that information. And I've met 2 presidents, met President Clinton, met President Reagan, and I did go to the groundbreaking ceremonies. I was invited to the White House when President Reagan was...
on the Holocaust Memorial in Washington.
Yeah.
We were invited there.
And I sat with the architect's wife. We both sat with Mrs. Pei. He was the architect for the United States National Holocaust Museum. This was a very big honor. And I also sat next to Senator Lautenberg, who has since passed away from New Jersey. So, there were some nice things all along, only due to the fact that my parents gave that to me. You know, some children don't use that information and don't kind of create their experiences. They kind of put it into the background or into the recesses of their mind. But I was the exact opposite. I used it for positive reinforcement because you don't want things like that happening to anybody. And you would hope that grandchildren, my children are knowledgeable, yes, but you would hope that these grandchildren of ours, we have 5, are going to be just as thoughtful about what went on in my life, especially my life. So now my 12-year-old granddaughter has done a study because it was required in school at one point to pick someone, and she had picked me, being a survivor child, and she did questions, interview, just like what you were doing. And then another grandson, who's now 8, the same thing. In his school, they were asked to pick somebody and to explain about a family member. So I think it's kind of in a progressive lineage. That's how it looks to me. And I'm happy about that because I want them to know. Marie is American-born, also with background that suffered. But, when you're not an American, people do suffer in many countries with different things. But you have to know. You know your culture. You should know what people went through. You know, it's not as easy as it looks. People go through a lot.
I think with my parents, I see that even nowadays, when people come with a lack of the English language, they're very uncomfortable. Because we met a painter recently, named Gustavo, and he's from Guatemala. He went to university there. He was an engineer. He's painting houses now. And he says he couldn't get a job because of the language. And your degree from Guatemala doesn't pass to here. Mm-hmm. And my parents were the same way when they came. They came as little children, and they just spoke Russian, of course. They spoke a little Yiddish, whatever. And they were always, till the day practically they died, they were very respectful of authority, like I said. And they were uncomfortable with everyone in authority, too, besides being respectful, because they didn't speak as well the language. They had the accent, like Sarah says. And they're always very uncomfortable with the American people. And that struck me as it's still continuing to this day. When people coming out from another country, especially without the English language, they suffer also. You're taking someone who's an engineer in Russia, Poland, anywhere, the Caribbean, anywhere you're taking them, and you bring them here, and they're lucky if they can clean a toilet or something. And it's a sad situation because I think as an American native, well, the native is the American Indian, but as a person born in the United States, I see it even more that they're very uncomfortable and they're treated very poorly by other people. Most people that are immigrants are treated as if they're stupid because they don't speak the language. I've seen even teachers. I was in a reading program where I was assigned to yeshivas and Catholics, but I worked for the city, and the teachers there weren't that experienced. They were paid very poorly compared to a city teacher. I was a city teacher, and I saw that. And by being paid poorly, they got the lowest element of teachers that they can get, and they would yell at a child if they didn't understand them. If they came from another country, they'd say, "Can't you hear me?" And the child had no idea what the teacher was talking about. So I said, "He can hear you, but he doesn't know what you're talking about. Just explain to him, show him a picture what you want done. Illustrate something, and he'll understand you." And they got the hint, but it's sad. Because even to this day, most people treat immigrants like dirt. And I was more aware of it because my parents were immigrants. And they mostly hung out with friends that spoke Russian because they were comfortable. They couldn't hang out with Americans because Americans didn't want to hang out that much with immigrants. So it was a whole situation. Even to this day, I see the same situation. So they didn't suffer like her parents. Of course, Sarah's parents are a lot worse. But my parents, in their own way, would have liked to have been, I guess, maybe a little more Americanized, but they couldn't be. They really, I think till the day they died, weren't accepted as well as the American. Because I sometimes look at it, and I have very little respect for authority. The reason I say that is because I think my parents had so much, so very little rubbed off on me, unfortunately. I felt bad for that, really.
Can you tell me, Sarah, what role the library played, if any, in your life growing up?
I love the library. I happen to think it's an excellent vehicle for people to experience all kinds of things that happen in life, whether it's a book that you want to read just for pleasure or a book for knowledge. I've used the library consistently throughout my life. I'm a teacher, so you can't get away from books, that's for sure. I've kept my books. That's a poor quality sometimes because I hate to part with anything. So all through school and even in marriage, with all our years, I shuffled my books, whether college books or language books, and it's very hard for me to part with a lot of my school possessions. My books give me pleasure, and of course the knowledge that I've gained. I used to be one of the students. I was an A student, so I used to underline. I didn't have a highlighter in those years, what they do now, but I had a pencil and I had a little ruler, and sometimes I had my lead pencil, my certain scripto that they probably don't have anymore, a scripto lead pencil, and I used my ruler to underline perfectly because I was one of those. I was a neat Nick, so to speak, but everything was underlined. I think every book that I ever owned and that I studied from also had underlinings. And yeah, books are great. I love seeing my grandchildren. I bring books to them as part of their growing up, and we value the library. Definitely an asset in any neighborhood.
I think when I grew up, the library was somewhat of a second home because we couldn't even afford an encyclopedia or something. We could afford just one encyclopedia, one volume, for the entire world was in one book for us. It wasn't the world book, it was just one large encyclopedia. Exactly. And basically, that became outdated. So the library became World Book Encyclopedia, Encyclopedia Britannica, etc., etc., the Atlas, New York Times, and so on. And then what I think also, it's not so much the library, it's who runs it. Because I think I'm plugging you, Sharon, but I really think, honestly, you made the Kings Bay Library what it is. Because we were here beforehand. We've been here in the neighborhood for 38 years. And before you came, we took a book out from here, we returned the book. Or a video we took out and returned it. You have programs here for seniors.
Very nice.
You have programs for toddlers
nice.
And all that.
And the best
thing
in those years, when our kids were growing up and we used Kings Bay, definitely, on Friday afternoons, I do remember I was finishing my day as a teacher, and I would bring both girls into the library, into this library, and there was a riff program. So you take out a book, and you bring it back, and then when you finish the book,
If you finish 6 books, you got one free book.
you would
I
get
believe
one
is
free
program.
pocket book.
Yes.
And yes, they're both teachers. Both girls are teachers, so it didn't
And I
rub
think
off.
it developed because also the library, it's so much, what does the person in charge offer you? And I
It's
think
very
that's important
important.
because
Very important.
you want a program like we're older for seniors, as I said. You want a program for toddlers, for babies,
Right,
and all
right.
that. And that's why people come to the library. Because to lend a book nowadays is a very outdated program. It's
I
videos,
was
CDs,
thrilled
everything.
when I found out from 2 seniors who are much older than I am that there's a program in this library called Silver Sneakers. I did not even know. And I said, how did that pass me by? Because I know I walk past the library and I go in, but maybe I didn't really realize what the program was until I retired from teaching, and we did help with grandchildren babysitting and full-time babysitting. So maybe that's why I missed it. But the minute I heard about it, I came in and I was told, absolutely, you could just enter. Don't worry about having a special, because some gyms do it. If you have a certain health program, they do it for free. But my girlfriend in Philadelphia said, try the library also, and I was really pleasantly pleased that they do have Silver Sneakers for seniors here at this
I
library.
think the only problem with this library is it's like a stepchild to the city. I think it's a quasi-agency of the city, not a full agency, and they get minimal funding. You have to scrounge around for every penny. I worked for the library when I was in college. I was a clerk, shelving books, I guess you call it a clerk. And also I worked for the Flatbush branch near Linda Boulevard, and the same thing here in Kings Bay. The funding is so poor, you have to fight for every penny. It's a sad thing, really. We don't respect libraries where we've been to Europe, we've gone on vacation and all that, and the libraries are given funding tremendously. Here it's like every penny you have to scrounge for it. It's a very sad state of affairs because the better there's a library with people come in, the better they're educated, it's a better society. It's less problems, whether it's crime, welfare, or whatnot. It's a lot less problems.
Can you go back, Sarah, and tell me about the schools you went to? You mentioned, I think it was it PS 100?
When I came to
When you
New
came.
York, I was in a very short interim at PS 100, which was what they would call a kindergarten program. But we weren't here long enough, actually. My parents did move to New Jersey, to the farming community, and they had tested me. I was learning English already, and I skipped a grade. So I went into first grade. I never really had kindergarten, and that's why I started college at 15 and a half, because skipping the grade. My English, of course, improved quickly, and my parents had gotten me a high school student to improve my reading ability. So in first grade, I did well, and I continued through. I did all New Jersey schools. I went to Montclair State Teachers College, which was for secondary education. It's now a state university in New Jersey. I came to New York, got my master's, went to Brooklyn College and Hunter at the same time. I had a scholarship to LIU for ESL. I worked at my college in New Jersey, actually, with a program, and then I had gotten a scholarship to Sarah Lawrence in Bronxville, New York. So I did come to New York for a summer. I also was part of the Tel Aviv University in Israel. I had a program there that I was given a scholarship to, and from my college in New Jersey, I went to the Inter-American University in Puerto Rico. So I did have Spanish background. I was a French and Spanish major in college.
Can you tell me about any of your teachers and what were they like growing up in like elementary school or high
I
school?
loved every teacher I ever had. I knew I wanted to be a teacher, and I would say in Europe, I never veered any other way. I'm sure that if I was educated in a different country, I would still be the same teacher. It didn't matter. I just knew it. I felt it. That this is what I wanted to do. I loved, being with children, and I liked the fact that I could be the leader sometimes, so I had my own camp. I was about 10 or 11 years old in New Jersey where my parents lived. I created a camp in the backyard. I had neighborhood children come. The parents brought them, and they were so thrilled because we did songs and play and then did all kinds of group things that the kids do growing up today. And then we created it was like an assembly at the end of camp, my camp. And so they were thrilled that there was something for the children to do, for their children. And, this was my calling. There is no other way. I can just say every teacher I had is memorable in one way or another. I really enjoyed every teacher. The only thing that I didn't like was when I was finding difficulty in a subject area. I was not that smart in economics. I ended up with a fairly good grade, but I remember in college it used to drive me crazy that I couldn't get it for whatever reason. The professor had written the book, and that was the book we had to learn, and I just didn't achieve the A that I needed to achieve. But whatever it is, I was, still happy with everyone.
I think education to us is very important in our house because my parents knew to get ahead and get out of their ghetto, in a sense, education was the only way out. Economically, I couldn't go with my father's business pressing clothes. It wasn't his business. He worked for someone. So basically, they pushed education in our house, my sister and I. My sister taught. She's retired like I am now. But the thing is, education was everything. If you ask me about my teachers, I think they were great. Every teacher pushed me as much as they could push me. And I think because of my teachers, I went to public school, 174, junior high. I went to 149 East New York also for 2 years. And then I made Brooklyn Tech. And I went to Brooklyn Tech for 4 years. What I learned in Brooklyn Tech applies even today, things around the house or something. It's amazing. What I learned there, I still maintain things from over 50 years ago when I graduated high school. And after Brooklyn Tech, college was extremely simple. I went for maths, I went for a BA in Brooklyn College, a master's, and a postmaster's in administration supervision. But I think basically Brooklyn Tech is the best thing in the world for me.
And you were going to be an architect.
I was going to be an architect too, then Vietnam came along,
right.
and honestly I became a teacher.
That's right.
Because I didn't want to go to war, and basically there was an occupation deferment. If you taught in the ghetto area, they called it a ghetto in those days, and I got an occupation deferment to not go to Vietnam because of being a teacher in East New York. But I missed not being an architect. I would have loved that.
And his math is great. He has great math ability.
Because of Brooklyn Tech. So I can say my education was fantastic. One teacher was better than another. And they encouraged me to be a teacher also. It helped a lot also. I love teaching. I loved my job for 36 years. And I got old and I retired. I felt that was it. I wanted to retire on a high note when I enjoyed it. I didn't want to retire in maybe my 70s or something. When you're so old, you don't enjoy it anymore.
And you want to help your children.
And we're doing great with our grandkids, right? I mean, our grandkids are beautiful.
Very important.
Sarah, can you talk about the people in the neighborhood you grew up in?
Well, growing up in
New Jersey and then
in
Manhattan.
New Jersey, I didn't live that long in New Jersey because I was already in college at such a young age. So the people that I knew, they were friends of my parents, and they were mostly all Holocaust survivors. So for about 15 years, we lived there, close to 17 years, but I had left for college. I lived at my college in the dorm. I would say they were all European and extremely versed, whether it was language ability. They all were people that had suffered, of course, with war, but I was taught how to read and write Yiddish by one of the Holocaust survivors. My parents were very interested that I continue culture, our culture. There was a woman in their group of friends who was a famous ballet dancer, but her legs were ruined because Hitler had done things to people that were very, very creative. You know, there were a lot of different things.
Torture.
Forms of torture. I don't know what the word is, but forms of torture, I guess, to the creative people. And she was extremely famous as a ballet dancer in Europe. So she was not able to, she was able to walk and things like that, but she was not a dancer anymore. But she taught dance, and she was in the group of my parents' friends. So, and I wanted to, not that I could have ballet lessons and pay, but, you know, people in those years, it's what they call bartering. Where one family can do something, then the other family will give back in another way. And that's how my parents' friends were. A lot of them were farmers, yes. There are a few people that
and there's
were
really
not.
no money to exchange in those
Right.
days.
So
No one
they
had
didn't
money.
exchange in money, but they exchanged in talent or creative ability or the
Skills.
language, the skills that I had learned in a different language. And so I had wanted to learn ballet and do some, not gymnastics per se, but just modern dance, and because that was so popular at that time. And I think I love dance because of that woman who has since passed away. She had emigrated to Israel to be near her children when they had married. But that's how I grew up, those beginning years. And then here in New York, basically the Brooklyn area where we've lived, when we got married, all teachers. A lot of our friends are teachers, believe it or not. We get together and talk about teaching, whether we're retired or not. So if you're not a teacher, you feel so left out, and I always feel bad. I say, that's it for teaching, stop talking, let's go to the next topic, because it just happens that you are...
You talk when you get older, though. It's also teaching or medical.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you had that test yesterday. We went out with friends a few months ago, remember? And we talked in the restaurant all about medical conditions. Oh, you have this, you're suffering from this and that and that. And the table next to us were older people, too. They started laughing. Because you know why? They said they do exactly the same thing. And we changed the conversation. We realized, thank God we're alive, we're still kicking. And basically, remember? And,
Right.
they also left. They do the same thing. So somehow,
Now it's a different...
we're fortunate,
right.
we're healthy, we're close to 70 years of age, but we see other people that have more debilitating conditions.
medical issues.
Yeah, right. So we're very fortunate. We have very minimal medical issues
We're
and all
lucky.
that.
We're lucky.
And we're very lucky about that.
Right.
I hope it's worth it.
Right.
But the truth is, so really, that's but the truth is, so we're very fortunate in our lives. We look back on it. We raised 2 beautiful children, 5 great grandkids we have, and we're a lot fortunate of many other people. So look in a very positive way. I think it's very important for your outlook on life to be positive. If it's negative, it reduces your longevity. You will get sick, and if you do get sick, you'll get sicker.
True.
The symptoms will get worse if you think you can't survive or something. If you're negative.
So let me ask you, Sarah, what did you and your friends do for fun while you were like in elementary or high school?
I was a cheerleader in high school, so I had many sports activities, always doing some sports activity as a cheerleader. I was on the yearbook committee. I was what they call the teachers club. I knew I wanted to be that. I was in the French club, in the Spanish club. We were in on the literary committee to write articles to get the yearbook ready. I don't think I missed too many. I was an active kid, and I continued that in college. I made who's who in American colleges and universities, and I had a lot of scholarships. I went all over with scholarship money, not paying. So I've seen a lot of countries in a short period of time, college years especially. And then as a teacher, I was very lucky too with scholarship programs. So I've seen a lot of the world that way. Yeah. I've
Did you
been
play
very
any
lucky.
sports? Did you play any sports?
Yes. I'm not good at anything. I'm a lefty, so I try things. But we have tennis rackets. I do have a friend from Australia. She's a tennis enthusiast, but I can do tennis. I was on the basketball team. I went to the bowling club. I've tried. Doesn't mean I'm good, but I've tried.
And Maury,
I
you
think
mentioned you did stickball and baseball.
Right. I think when we grew up, people call it organized sports. In our case, it's disorganized sports, because basically we formed our own baseball teams. We play stickball. It's called, you play from one sewer to another. Basically, when you hit a stickball, If you're very good, you can go hit maybe 2 or 3 sewers. The main sewers in the middle. And that's what we did. We played it all the time. If we didn't play out in the street, in the gutter, we would go to the park and play in the park. We played baseball in the park, basketball. We played some tennis, whatever. And everything was sports in those days. And we always formed our own teams at the moment, and we made up our own rules, whatever you want to call it, and we had a great time. We loved doing it.
Now my next question will ask, how did your experiences growing up in your neighborhood affect your life? Now Sarah, you already mentioned a lot in terms of your parents' friends and how they did bartering and stuff like that. Is there anything else that you would like to add about your experiences growing up in the neighborhood, how it has affected you today?
Well, I think whatever I've experienced, I've made my family realize that they have a background with a lot of situations that have to be remembered and never to be forgotten, and to continue life knowing that they're, especially I'm talking about the children, because they're more experienced than the grandchildren. They're certainly a lot older. That these are background situations that they should continue throughout their lives. This is their background too, because of their parents, because of Murray and myself. So I've lived through a lot of these things, and I think I've carried on with the background that I had. I followed through.
I think in my case, I think basically friends were much closer years ago, I believe, than they are now. Now everything dwells on a computer or maybe a TV show, whatever, or music or something, the iPhone, the iPad, etc. But our friends were very close. All we knew is if there wasn't school, we were outside. Or we went to one friend's house if it rained or snowed, we went to another friend's house. And I think that personal relationship is not as much now, I believe, as it used to be. That's what I feel.
Did you enjoy going to the theater as a young
Yes,
man?
we went to the theater, we went to movies and all that. Movies were like 25 cents in our area. For children, when we turned 12 as a trauma, because at 12 years of age, you had to pay the adult price, which was like 40 cents or something. It went up very little, very small cost. But we always went to movies. They had a feature film and cartoons, etc. And we enjoyed that. It was part of maybe a Saturday or something. We do that. And it was very nice, as poor as our parents were. And as I said, most of the neighbors were poor too. Saturday night we would go out to, like, there's an appetizing store or something, and buy some special food for that week, or something. So we managed. We survived very nicely. We managed, but money was minimal. But as I say, when you grow up in a community, everyone has the same amount of money. It's fine. You accept it. And you don't even realize that you don't have anything. You didn't have what we have today, whether it's computers or iPads and all that. We used to make a scooter out of a wooden box and put skates, old skates, on the bottom of the wooden box, and that became our scooter, with a piece of wood where the skates were. It's a very simple thing, and we played with simple things. If we had one toy, we played with it constantly. Nowadays, the toys made to break after perhaps a few weeks, whatever. Our kids have 5,000 toys now, our grandkids. And so I think it's a different lifestyle. Whether it's good or not, it's everyone's opinion. But I think we grew up beautifully. And like I said, we lacked financial means, but other than that, we lacked nothing.
Can you talk, Sarah, in your opinion, how the neighborhood has changed for the better and for the worse?
Well, I think we lived here in Sheepshead Bay for 37 years. And when we moved in, we were the youngest couple when we bought the house. People were a bit older.
Our age at that time.
Yeah,
Right.
they were older, and they already, I think one neighbor already had grandchildren. So and I had 2 young children. So we came in at a time where I had an Italian neighbor and I had a Jewish neighbor on the other side of us. So I think we were very connected with them because of family. They just took us in, opened their arms. In a cousins club, we never even had a cousins club. We don't even have that many relatives. But each each side of where our house is
We
located.
were their children in a
Right.
sense.
So
we ended up,
I think we
they
had
adopted us unofficially.
right.
I think,
We had
basically.
the greatest
Right.
way to move into a neighborhood, even though being a little bit younger, of course, than they were. But it just seemed we were connected to them with family, by family. One would have coffee outside in the backyard, invite us for Italian coffee. The other neighbor had, different kind of barbecues. We were always invited. I think it was wonderful. Now it's really very different because these people have, one neighbor has since passed, the other neighbor moved quite a few years ago to Florida.
I think now everyone closes their door.
Right,
I
I do believe it's
and
different.
you know what? I think basically everyone is not as sociable as it used to be. We were told before we moved in like 37, 38 years ago that every year our block had a block party. Now, it never happened in 38 years. It did happen 40 years ago. I guess we weren't there. Said that they did have block parties every year, and they opened it up. They had a little flea market set up. And the police would close off the street. They gave permission, to get a permit tree off. It doesn't happen nowadays because everyone's either going to work or something, and the relationship with our neighbors now is basically, hi, how are you, how's the family?
And
it's
that's it, and the
reciprocated.
doors are closed.
And the door's closed, and basically
you don't see the people.
we miss
really.
that because it's a beautiful thing.
We used to sit outside.
Yeah, we sit outside
front.
and just and
Little porch.
we used to talk to our neighbors and all that.
talk.
Basically, it wasn't only a block; it was like a little small town.
But there are different ethnic groups have come in. Our block especially has changed a
It's
lot.
Arabic now, yes.
It's
mostly.
more Arabic, yes, and we're not versed in Arabic.
And the culture's different, but we
Culture
have a
is
neighbor who
different.
happens to be from Yemen. He's been here for 25 years. We have good rapport. We get along very well. It's not the Jew versus the Muslim. It's basically we get along well because we're both into families. In fact, he's buying our
There
house.
there is a
He
connection.
wants to expand his house because he has a very how many, 3, 4 families there? He has a lot of families living in his house, a 2-family house.
relatives.
Because his daughters got married and had kids, his son got married and had children. So basically,
But
he's buying
they're
our
very
house.
family
But we get
minded.
along very well with
Very.
him for one reason. The culture may be a little different where he comes from, where I come from. But the idea is exactly the same. He cares about his family. He's very into family. He always invited us to his weddings of his children and all that. And
His
basically,
daughter's name is Sarah because that's a very popular name in
but
Muslim
basically,
culture.
we don't look at it. It's not that we're running away from him. We want to be close to our children because basically, I'm tired of traveling back and forth. And so this is unusual because you would think Muslim and the Jew don't get along, very honestly, because of the culture with Palestine and Israel and the whole situation. But basically, we think whoever's fighting in that area are idiots. We feel that it's the government doing the fighting and not really the people. The people have very little voice what's going on, unfortunately. So we get along very well. We talk about everything, and we relate well because we're both family
the
people.
culture is different. So that's a big, big change for us.
And if we go down the block, no one really knows us. We don't know them, and basically, well, not hello maybe if
Because
seeing them a
people
bunch
have
of times.
changed, whether they've moved or passed away. We're there a
In
very
our
long
case, mostly
time.
passing away.
We're the youngest
We
people
were the
coming
youngest.
in.
Now we're the
oldest.
Exactly.
Right,
It's a transition
So
of
that's
areas.
that's the
but
change.
basically, I don't think people even
That's
make an
the
effort to
change.
get along now. Like they do their own little thing and go into the house and
it's a
close the
different
door.
lifestyle.
And maybe I don't know if you see it. You see it now from where you grew up in the Caribbean. But I really believe
it's very
it's totally different, and I really miss East
We
New
do
York.
miss it. We do
Because
miss that.
I loved relating to my neighbors and all that. If you had a situation or problem with anything, go to your neighbor. If your parents couldn't resolve it, you speak to your neighbor and all
Right.
that. And your friends were always there for you 24 hours. It didn't matter. And you have rapport with people for years and years and years. And, you always wonder, some people moved away, we have no idea what happened to them. We always wonder what happened, actually, where they went, what happened. But the truth is, now, to me, it's very sad. It's your own little house, your own little box. You go into your box, close the door, and that's it. And,
That's a big change.
it's a big change for us, really.
Culturally, it's a big
So
change.
that's the bad change, the fact that there's a different culture, basically, there, but more than a different culture, there's no rapport anymore. It's basically, hello, how are you, and all that. But we have more rapport made because we're neighbors for 18 years. And we sort of like, we're both into families, like Sarah says. We're big on family. If we're not here, we're in Long Island with one of our kids. The youngest daughter has 3 kids, and the middle child has a lot of medical issues. So we're there a lot. We're going, in fact, sleeping over Thursday night, Friday, we're going to a hospital. He has to go for endoscopy. He has a lot of problems. He has to take a lot of tests. But basically, that's something we have to deal with. But when we come home, we'll lock our door and go back into our house. So we missed that. The good was there was a lot of rapport years ago. Now it's just locking our door and going in our house. Very little. A few neighbors we relate to.
It's still a quiet neighborhood, though.
It is nice,
Still
yeah.
quiet.
What makes Brooklyn so special? What are some of the things about this neighborhood that make it a great place to live?
I would say the library is fantastic. Not because I'm in the library, right? I really mean that. And basically, it offers so many services that are developing programs. It's something you look forward to going to. And as we're older, we want to travel less, so we do that. And from Brooklyn, you can get to Manhattan very easily. We go to shows there all the time. There's a movie house near our house and all that. And going to restaurants, unfortunately, eating is available all the time.
Also, the schools were very good.
And
My
the
children
schools were
grew
great
up
too,
in
yes.
this neighborhood and went to very good schools.
That's right. That's important too.
Yeah,
It's the
that was
most
great.
important thing.
That was great.
And very little, like Sarah said beforehand, it's very little crime. It's mostly a safe neighborhood, basically. You don't hear terrible things happening in Sheepshead Bay. So fortunate about that also.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who would hear this interview?
Well, we wish everyone luck coming into this neighborhood. It I think, has expanded in a very good way. The library has been a big force for us,
That's right.
especially as seniors. And I would wish them luck and success, and hopefully the library will continue. This library is now the mainstay of the entire neighborhood because of these programs. So hopefully there will be continuation of these programs.
And I would love to see the neighborhood basically going back to the way it was perhaps many years ago, where people related better no matter where they came from, whatever their background is, and had more rapport. And maybe the library can do something bringing people together. They do have the current events courses and all that, and maybe more diverse people will come in, and you get to know someone else's culture, so it's not that frightening. It's not that scary.
Now, you've been in Sheepshead Bay for 37 years, so can you talk a little bit of how did it look back then, 37 years ago? What businesses were there?
It looks the same as it looks now. Architecture and all that, nothing. Mostly houses that are built currently are built like boxes. I took architecture drawing at Brooklyn Tech, and basically they're functional. They're not nice anymore. The older houses you see maybe in Park Slope or downtown Brooklyn, they're gorgeous. They were built with care, by hand. A lot of the designs in the house are by hand. Now it's just a box building. That's all they built.
And Sheepshead Bay, by the water, especially Emmons Avenue, really has changed. They used to have individual small restaurants, lots of
larger ones.
the restaurants.
And the restaurants
look
constantly
different.
change the type of restaurants.
Right.
Chain stores move in like
And the
Applebee's or something.
condos, I think, have taken over
Yes.
in this area. We see a lot of condos,
And they're very overpriced
high-rise
too, the condos.
buildings.
Because we know people who are trying to buy condos and they're extremely overpriced. They could be 1.2 million, some crazy amount of money, and they're built very tiny
And
and
they're
small.
small. They're
Exactly.
small.
We saw a few condos. We were curious when we were ready to sell our
Very
house. We went
small.
around and saw them, and they're extremely overpriced. And if you're on the water, you must get very high priced flood insurance if you do buy a condo.
Also, parking
It's
has
terrible, yeah.
really gone to the limit, I think.
So
there's
really,
no
I don't
space.
see the change physically
Not
is not
any
that much. You
space.
still have the boats pulling in every day, 3, 4 o'clock. They bring their fish from the ocean and all that. So basically, it's the same thing it was years ago. In fact, Humphrey Bogart was in a movie, and Sheepshead Bay is part of the movie. I forgot the name, not the African Queen, but he played a captain or something on a
Right.
ship, on a little boat, and he was there. I don't remember the name of the movie. I'd love to find
But the
out.
fishing boats were a lot more then.
Yes,
and the
now there are
little
less because now there are
places
large boats,
Right.
and most
And
of
the
the
little
large boats
places
are pleasure boats. They're
are gone.
they go for cruises. The people not a cruise, but a few
Right,
hours
right.
out. They eat and come back. So
You
the
had-
little
used to have a
boats,
lot more
the little
boats.
boats are gone though.
Right.
Most of the big boats
Right.
are here.
And the small
Yeah.
restaurants are
Right.
gone. It's very impersonalized, I think.
It's more a very commercial strip. It's
Yeah.
like any other area in the United States. It's becoming a tourist attraction more so, I think, now, and that's why you have Applebee's, etc. But the little restaurants to us were more enjoyable than the large chain store
They do have
franchise
some
restaurants.
ethnic restaurants, which they
Yes.
didn't have before. So it has changed.
Okay, is there anything that you feel that we have not discussed or
No.
should be added to this interview?
No, I think you did a very thorough
You did a
job.
great
It's
job.
fantastic.
You guys did a
Thank
wonderful
you.
job. I
You did
really
a wonderful
enjoyed
job,
it
too.
listening to you.
The questions were great because it makes you think about things. The questions help us respond to you,
Just,
really.
we left out, I didn't know your last name, both of us didn't, so
We know.
you'll put
Sharon
it down.
Palmer.
Palmer.
Oh,
We
yeah,
left it out on
okay.
the
On the form.
sheets.
That's all right.
Okay.
So Sarah
thank you
and
very
Maury
much.
Lefsky,
Thank
it's
you.
been
It's our
such a
pleasure.
pleasure.
Oh,
Really.
thank
Thank you.
Thank you very much.